listening to the Getting Salty Experience podcast.
Welcome back, Leatherhead Nation. Here we are again at the Firehouse kitchen table. We got a good, interesting, fact-filled show for you boys tonight. As always, I got my boy Ruffy. He had a little Cupolini on. He took it off. He was sweating.
It's too hot. I was sweating.
Yeah, we got Pete up there in the North Shore now. Is that the North Shore?
No, it's right dead in the middle of the island.
Oh, he's in the middle.
There's no shore here.
And we don't have him in the backstage because we wanted to get him right out today. We have author and historian Joe Kearney.
Yes.
But Pete, why don't you give us the shameless plugs, because we love to plug our own shit on the show.
Well, it's better than plugging other people's stuff. But here we go, guys. The GettingSaltyApparel.com website is up, running, and waiting for you guys to take a look at stuff like this. The most comfortable sweatshirt I've ever worn, bar none. Maybe the hat that Ruffy's wearing there, or the t-shirt that Mr. Koobs is wearing. We got tumblers and drink coolers and koozies and all kinds of wonderful firefighter apparel and accessories. So guys, if you want to support us and support the show, head on over to GettingSaltyApparel.com. But also, if you guys in the chat tonight want to support us, hit us up in the super chat. You know what I mean? Don't get those alligator arms. No T-Rex arms here. Don't cramp up. You know, if you guys have a question that you absolutely need asked, or if you guys just want to be cool and shoot us a little dough, a little something, hit us up, man. Super chat. Boom. And
you want to make it rain? You want to make it rain?
Yeah, we're like strippers. Just make it rain on us.
Yeah.
Here it is.
The topic was the war years. And what do we mean by the war years? Well, we want to know how the perfect storm came together, what made it the war years, and could it repeat itself? Could that happen again? You know, there was many contributing factors to the war years. We're going to outline the war years when they started, give you some facts on it, and we're going to try to separate facts from conjecture when it comes to, was the city complacent, or were there things that they had in place that contributed to the war years? So right off the bat, welcome Joey to the show. Thanks for coming back on.
Oh, thank you guys.
We're going to plug those books again. You got 2 out now, right, bud?
Yes, but right now we're hoping to finish up Captain Farrell's book, which once we get that edited, we can't wait to get that out. He has a tremendous wealth of information, and I think as Lou just said, it's so hard to find guys who lived through that experience. Right. It's a dwindling generation. You know, my dad passed away in '97. A lot of them are gone. You know, and to have him sharp as a tack and being able to tell the accounts that he has, it's unbelievable. You know,
well, you could tell him, because I've been working on Captain Farrell for a few months. So Koobs calls me up today. He's like, "Oh yeah, Bob Farrell's coming on." I'm like, "What?" Like, what? He's like, "Yeah, he's coming on today." So I'm like, "You got to be kidding me! How did you get him?" He's like, "Oh, Joe knows him. He's very close with him." I'm like, "You got to be shitting me!"
Well, he was going to come on the show tonight.
He was going to come on the show tonight.
A little technologically challenged, so we're going to make it work out for him for another night.
Yeah, his computer doesn't have a camera, so I said we go to his phone, but he has a flip phone, so that didn't work. So we're going to work it out. We're going to somehow either ship him a computer. I think he's got a laptop in his office, right? Yeah, we're going to make it happen so we can listen to his actual.
He's great. Yeah.
We'll make it work. Hey, you guys mind if I read that one quote from Joe Flood's book?
Yeah, go ahead. Start it off, Pete.
Yeah, I think this is a great scene setter. As I was looking around, I found this one at hookandirons.com, a few things from hookandirons.com, but it was Game 2 of the 1977 World Series, a chilly, blustery October night in the South Bronx. The Yanks were already down 2-0 in the bottom of the first inning when ABC's aerial camera panned a few blocks over from Yankee Stadium to give the world its first live glimpse of a real Bronx cookout. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. The Bronx is burning, Howard Cosell intoned. So there you go.
That's your best Howard Cosell right there?
No, I get whatever, man.
Come on, you
I was a
put
baby.
a little oath behind it.
I was maybe 2 years old when
there you go.
No. But no, I mean, I think that's a really to think about something like the World Series that's our national pastime and to pan away in one smooth shot away from the game out of the stadium.
Dude, they did
it burned
multiple times. The fire burned for like, I don't know, an hour and a half. And it kept moving on. Like, I guess it was extended to other buildings. I just watched the clip not too long ago. And they kept going back to it. Like every 15 or 20 minutes, and it was getting bigger. It was a 6-story vacant or whatever the hell it was, Joe. Right? I don't remember.
No, in that period, even in the 80s, going across the George Washington Bridge, it was rare not to see smoke coming out of someplace. Yeah. In the 70s, I'm sure it was virtually every day, and probably multiple every day. That you saw. Different era, different guys, different era. Different fire department,
I remember getting on the when I used to go upstate with my family. We used to take the Deegan, right, to get onto the George Washington Bridge, and they had all those tenements there, right?
And they put the fake windows
They put the fake metal, the HUD windows that had the looked like a guy dancing. One guy was like leaning against the wall. One guy, there was like pots of planted pots and stuff like that.
Yeah, whenever we visited my family in Jersey, my aunt in Jersey, we would see. I would ask my dad why that was that way, and he was just like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, trying to go as fast as you can through there, right? I mean,
God forbid you got a flat,
Yep. So I wanted to brush up. So my buddy Randy Simon sent me a copy. Believe it or not, I had not read it. Report from Engine Company 82. Great book. I just finished it today, and it sets a good feeling. It sets a good tone. It almost brings you back to that time in the mid 60s, and the Bronx was just burning down. So we talked about this in the pre-show, Joe. What we basically said, like probably mid 60s. It started
probably the mid to late 70s.
Yeah, late 70s, and trickled into the 80s a little bit, the early part of the 80s. So I had pulled some stats, Pete, and we were looking. I don't know if you can pull them up. We were looking at the total alarms, and you can see it from basically 1960, 61. It's 97,000 total alarms to a height of 425,000 total alarms in 1976. So you can see how the fire duty went through the roof. But why did it happen? That's small. I don't know if you can bring that up, Pete. That's tiny. It's tiny.
Something about those stats that we should remember today the stats include a lot of medical runs and other emergencies. Back then, the job description, those guys mainly went out for phone alarms and for reports of fires, maybe car accidents, things like that. But it was there was no EMS connected to the fire department at that time, so they were all
right. So Pete, if you push that all the way to the left, you'll see it says EMS runs, a 0 of EMS runs. So that's all. I mean, you look at the fires alone through those years.
Yeah, 78 was the top,
probably
210,000.
210,792. And Engine 82, according to this the factoids that I pulled up, did 10,000 runs in 1 year, which was one call every 45 minutes, night and day for the entire year.
Yep. 700 runs a month, and they were going back sometimes. But we'll get into it why they were going back to the same buildings over and over.
What are the fires now? Keep going down, Pete.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, so 2015 is 45,000.
Right. So you see,
it's been pretty consistent over the last 15, 20 years for the most part.
It was a little hot still in the 90s, a little hotter than now, almost twice the work.
That's when I got on, kid, early 90s. Kid.
That's right. That's
back
right.
In the early 90s, Joe, when Lee got on.
When men did the work.
Yeah. All right, so let's kind of talk about what got it there. What were the contributing factors to the Warriors? Who wants to start? Ruffy, you want to start with a little? I mean, of course, the fiscal crisis. Or Joe, anybody chime in?
Yeah, Joe, we could start with that. That would probably be the best with the fiscal crisis, kind of like where it started from, and then all the other policies that kicked in after that.
Well, yeah, the fiscal crisis seemed to start with the Lindsey Beam administration. Lindsey was first elected in 65, then re-elected in 69. He was, aside from the current mayor, probably the most liberal. He gave away huge contracts. And the funny thing was with the fire department, Captain Farrell said in 67 or 68, he got a $2,000 raise from $5,000 to $7,000. And he thought, I'll never work a B job. That's a side job again, right? And almost every fireman did back then. So he thought, initially he's thinking, this guy's great, right? The thing he did is up until that point, firefighters and police officers made, I believe it was 25 or 30% more than any other city employees, teachers, sanitation, et cetera. And the reason was, the life-threatening potential in those occupations. He narrowed that gap to 10%. So despite the $2,000 raise and despite all of the giveaways, he was despised by everybody, and it was sad. Like you said, I remember one time I was in high school, I guess, in the early 70s, and he made a tour through Harlem, and somebody from the sidelines like spit in his face, right? And that's how can you say, an indelible image that you have of him. It's kind of like Dukakis with the military helmet.
Yeah, right.
It went down to his neck or something like that. Those things kill you, those photo ops destroy you, and so
that killed him, right? He didn't get the presidency because of it.
So yeah, he didn't really help himself with that, with any of that, and then with the reckless spending, and then the Rand, they used the Rand Corporation, and we can go into that a little later, but they wound up spending excessively and cutting services at the same time, and it was like a perfect storm where certain areas, central Brooklyn, the South Bronx, were pretty much devastated.
Right. So they had a gigantic budget going towards social services, which was Medicaid, welfare, housing, food, and the lack of tax revenue that was coming in, because what we were saying before, Louis, the blue collar workers were all running out to the suburbs, and they lost all that tax revenue. And, but much like today, where they want to give everything away for free to keep your vote, they just ran into a fiscal problem, and they kept borrowing money, I believe, from the banking institutions. Yeah. They were just to fix it without cutting budgets. To spend, borrow money to pay it, and just live like that.
Joe, you would probably know the facts better than me, but just some of the stuff that they did, like in the mid '60s, they were talking about even the pensions for most of the city workers, the sanitation, the teachers, the firemen, the cops. They kept like leapfrogging each other, right? They kept like, one-upping each other. I don't know if that's how we don't really do that nowadays, but it seemed like that back then. That's what they were talking about, where that's what things kind of got out of control, like Kevin was saying.
Well, it's funny. Again, Captain Farrell mentioned that we had in the 60s 35 years full pay retirement, right? I didn't even.
Right, I read that. Right.
That, right? Another one was the VSF. If we had allegedly kept the VSF, the stock market exploded since then. So I think it was like 3,000 points or so, 3,800 points when we gave it back to the city, right? And they promised it to 12,000 a year.
Right. Yep.
Well, look at it; it's 10 times where it is now.
Yeah.
Right. God knows, people are going. It could have been $50,000, $60,000. That's what the firemen and cops gave back. They really didn't give it back. It was one of those sticking points in the '89 contract, the one that we shot ourselves in the foot with. One of the issues was the police had already gone to the 5-year step up. The fire department still had 3 years to first grade, right? And they didn't want to give that up. The older guys didn't want to give it up for the new kids coming on. Didn't feel it was fair. They stepped up in 3 years. The city was adamant. That was not negotiable. The cops already got it. You're getting it, right? The same thing. The police had it. The VSF coerced from them in quote negotiations, and they looked at the fire department and said, we're gonna get that as well. And part of it was the numbers didn't work. There were more firemen that stayed on the job, right, for longer periods, right? So the payout didn't work as well. So the police got a higher payout. That was a sticking point. That's one of the main reasons that the push to go to arbitration in '89 happened, right? Because guys didn't want to accept that, right? And what happened is once we went to arbitration, we got killed. You know, they went to the scope, and the scope of bargaining, even things that are not on the table that weren't negotiated, everything that you have.
No shit.
They took the job description, they took minimum manning, they took the battalion-wide detail. When I first got on, you couldn't be detailed outside of your battalion. I was in the 19th battalion, two firehouses, 7533 and 4359. You knew you were going to. There were only 3 other companies that could detail you.
Is that when they took the mini vacation too, Joe?
Did they? Well, that's when they gave you the mini vacation because they went to a 24
group chart.
Chart, right?
I remember that. I came on with the 24 group chart, and then they switched it right away.
Well, what they did is they took them to court because the 25 group chart and the 24-hour system is needed to be changed by you need to change the state constitution, right? In other words, it was made into law, right? So they'd have to go up and get the law changed, and the city didn't do that, and they went back to the 25 group chart. And I think it was only a couple of years we had that.
Yeah, and they took it. They took the mini vacation.
They took the mini vacation, went back to the 25 group chart. You know, in fact, you know, before it was the 1970s when the 24s started to get popular. My dad worked when I was a kid, all the way through the 60s into the 70s. He worked, you know, 2 day tours, you know, 9 and 9, 48 hours off. Then you got 2 night tours, you know, 6 to 9, 15 hours.
72.
Then you got 72 hours off. And every third set of day tours,
Chinese
you got
72.
you'd get 72 hours off. And that's how they balanced it out. But the guys came and went, and every tour. And they were saying part of it was part of the things that pushed for the 24s was the gas crisis. Right. Well, it made sense for them to come in just to do 24s.
So
you know?
There's another thing that adds to the problems in the gas crisis, right? Gas was scarce. Gas was going up. I read some point too that they actually forced the labor unions to invest their pension funds into city municipal bonds, right?
Yes.
So that kind of it kind of neutered them from bargaining any kind of leverage, right? So you know. Now they're cutting services, right? Fire duties through the roof. They're closing firehouses, right? They're cutting the members down. So you talk about a perfect storm, and we looked at, you know, like I was just passing through the line of duty deaths, and what I say, 1962, you had like 18, 17, something like that, line of duty deaths. So civilian deaths are up, line of duty deaths are up, and they're cutting services. And we'll talk about why we think.
I think it was 3,000 guys, right? I mean, it looked like that on that sheet that you had up there before, Pete, was over 3,000 guys. It went from like 13 or 14,000 to like 10.
Also, another contributing factor is that it was estimated that up to a third of the hydrants were dead or broken. The budget for inspections was cut by 70%, which Lou didn't mind. And old rigs with outdated old rigs with outdated equipment were pushed into service as there was no money to fix the newer ones. So, you know what, you want to talk about contributing factors? I mean, geez.
Yeah. If the hydrants didn't have shit stuffed in them, you know, bottles or cans, they were cutting the tops off for the you know, $10 worth of brass that was on the nut in the top. You know, so it just the city was a mess. It was a mess. And we'll talk about, you know, the landlords, right? We were talking about that in the pre-show too. You know, tell us a little about that, Joe. One of
the big factors was well-intentioned rent control. Bob Farrell had mentioned that in the 30s and 40s, an apartment rented, like a one-bedroom would rent for $30 a month, right? He goes, but by 1968, because of rent control, you were still getting $30 a month, but your heating costs, electricity, building maintenance, taxes, everything had gone way up. So the landlords couldn't afford to maintain and operate those buildings anymore. One of the things they did was, I would think we spoke about this before, was you could overinsure a building at that time. So if your building was bought for $60,000, $80,000, let's say it was still kind of worth that in the ballpark, maybe 100,000. You can
That's crazy, man.
Yeah, you can insure it for pretty much whatever you wanted to insure it at. People insured it for $400,000-$500,000. Now it's a matter of like you pay a couple of premiums, building gets burned out, you get a windfall, and then you hand back the empty shell to the city. And that's why we were saying before is by the 80s, by the time I came on, the city was the biggest slumlord in its own city.
Right.
They owned all that crap.
They owned all that. They never fixed anything. They were as bad as any slumlord.
Right.
And just to give people an idea, if they haven't seen this, and I know our audience is quite educated and they've seen quite a bit of this, but remember we did a show about the Blitz, 3-4 weeks ago? Well, you tell me if this is the Blitz or if this is the Bronx in the 1970s. I mean, it is terrible. Some of these photos are terrible. Like, and look at these kids right here. To describe this to the listening audience, you have the shells of burnt out buildings that are destroyed and leveled, like you said, Joe, and kids playing on mattresses, jumping off of derelict buildings into piles of mattresses, just wild and free.
Well, then you had the garbage strike as well, right? So what did sanitation do? They laid off sanitation guys, right? And then the other guys said, because they're basically the only entity that could strike, right, Joe? I don't know.
Legally, yeah.
Legally, they could strike.
Yeah.
So they were striking, and then you just had, the garbage was building
Fires,
up all over.
Garbage up to the second story. Fires.
How long was the strike for, Joe? Months?
I think it went over a month. I have to look that up, but yeah, that was a pretty long strike, and it was especially problematic, for the people in Manhattan because there was no commercial pickup, so all the restaurant garbage rotted out in the street.
Had to be rats all over the place. Man.
Yeah.
And then also, wouldn't the garbage guys also add to the fires as well? That stuff catches fire.
They probably covered fire hydrants, so you couldn't find the hydrants. Probably garbage piled in front of it, on top of it. Stretching lines over piles of garbage too made it more difficult, I'm sure.
Yeah. Unbelievable though.
I really do remember that. What were we, cool? We were like 7 or 8 at that time, right? It was
9.
75. Yeah, 9. I remember that with all the garbage all over the place.
Yeah, but it wasn't just the 70s, because as a kid in the a 5 to 10-year-old, 15-year-old kid in the 80s, you still remember that it all those years affected the next 20 years ahead of them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It wasn't like that. Oh, well, we're out of the 70s and the 80s are booming now. So, you felt the residuals for many years after.
Right. Yeah. Well, what was going on too was that the city was asking the feds to give.
I was just going to say that.
To give them money to bail them out. Sounds familiar today, right? They want money to bail themselves out when they can't manage their own money. They're spending more than they're taking in. That's always been the problem. And then big social programs and no money to pay for it, with no intention of ever balancing a budget, and just keep asking for federal money. And the feds weren't giving it to them. That's why it says, forward to the city, drop dead.
Well, also, don't forget the 60s. I'm sorry to cut you off, Joe. The 60s were a time of incredible spending, which brought hyperinflation to the 70s, and that's why we wound up there. And I mean, you could basically be describing what we're going through today. Sorry to cut you off, Joe.
Well, no. But one of the things that happened as a result of the bankruptcy was, and it was probably a good thing. Unfortunately, it ended under the current mayor's term. I think in 2015, they had a financial control review board. So every time the city spent money between 1975 and 2015, it had to be approved by a group of bankers and former executives that overlooked all of their spending. That's why you didn't have the reckless spending you did that led up to the default in 1975.
Right. And
now they stopped that, Joe?
Yeah, it ended in 2015, unfortunately. And now you're going back. You have a crazy guy in there now that's actually spending everything. They'll spend on everything but police to secure the streets.
Right. So that's another contributing factor. Crime, right, was through the roof.
Yep.
Because when people, are living in these conditions, crime goes through the roof. Civil unrest, which is what we got going on today, right? It was a ton of civil unrest back in the late 60s.
Yep.
So these are all contributing factors. I mean, when I was finishing up the book today, there had to be 2 or 3 stories where Dennis Smith is telling you about somebody throwing a brick and hitting one of the firemen who were riding the back step, in the chest, in the eye, in the whatever it is. So not only you running from fire to fire, you got these knuckleheads throwing bricks at you as you're riding by.
Why?
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Why would they do that to firefighters? And in the documentary I was watching today, Man Alive, it's available on YouTube. One of the firefighters was saying it's because, and as a matter of fact, not that it matters, but he was black. So they asked him, what was it like to be a black firefighter servicing these neighborhoods? Did it help you? And he said, actually, it doesn't matter because the uniform represented the structure, the system. Right. And therefore, they were rebelling against anything system related, whether or not you were coming to save them or not.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
Well, what the best part is, after everything that we said, throw a blackout in there too. You know what I mean? After everything you said, just 1977, bam, you throw a blackout in there.
Cherry on the top, yeah.
And it just was absolute
pandemonium,
bedlam, man. I mean, I remember those days too, man.
Yep. Yeah.
Like everybody knows where you are that day, right?
Oh yeah, right. Everybody does, right? Well, it's like today. I think the toughest. It's incredibly hard to be a police officer today, but to be a black cop has got to be the toughest thing. You consider like a traitor to people in some of the areas. Like the guy in the video said, the uniform says it all. That's really your color is blue. So they and then what's worse is the Antifa white people. You target them for abuse. Which is incredible.
Yep.
Yeah, being called an Uncle Tom while you're trying to save people in your own community.
Yeah,
it's horrific, and everything now echoes of the past because we haven't learned from our mistakes as a society, or just have chosen to conveniently forget them.
It's them sowing the social discord, pitting people against people, which is what they're doing today, right?
Yes.
There was another good line. I don't want to keep going back to a report from Engine Company 82, but he had said this: no matter what natural disaster you witness, or no matter what war or whatever happens in society, or whatever happens in your city, whether an earthquake, storms, floods, firemen are always in the picture. Firemen are always in every picture you see, putting themselves out there, for their community. Not asking questions, not asking what race, color, creed, who you are, just out helping people, no matter what the situation is. So it's a little disheartening when people,
there was this info here. The RAND model pushed the fire chief and the mayor to make cuts that crippled the ability of the FDNY to respond to certain neighborhoods. In fact, one change alone was critical. For some time, stations had operated with second sections. Engine 82 was the main engine. But if it went out on a call, engine 85 backed them up. Second sections had been under scrutiny because implementing them didn't appear to reduce the call load. And indeed, under RAND's new model, you would never need a second section because you, in theory, respond to every call from the station. So just like that, there's no need for engine 85. So in 6 or 7 years, the FDNY moved or closed 50 companies, Flood says, the vast majority of them in the Bronx, Harlem, and central Brooklyn, because the model said you can close your busiest companies and not impact your ability to respond.
Yeah, right. That's what Joe was going to talk about, right? That RAND company that they brought in.
Like you said, you look at that. You brought in a bunch of bean counters. That's what he was. And what's funny about that was the RAND Corporation at the time was run by Robert McNamara, which Joe Flood goes into this very well. He had, despite today the fact that people remember McNamara, they kind of associate him with the Vietnam War, but he had a very checkered past. He was a young guy out of Stanford when World War II was occurring. He came up with the idea, they had about 20% of the bombers that we stationed in Europe wouldn't take off. In other words, mechanical difficulties or what have you, right? So he came up, like they brought him in as a efficiency expert, and his never was in the military. He decided that, yes, you know what, the reason that you have 20% going down is cowardice. These guys didn't want to go up there again, and that's what you have. So that kind of got him eventually drummed out of the Army. They stopped using it. He promptly gets to be the first non-Ford to head Ford Motor Company, and the Edsel comes out under his watch, right? So you think about this, like, it's unbelievable how he failed his way up. He kept failing and
failed his way up. I love it.
Yeah.
That's not how things go now. You just can do whatever the hell you want.
Lyndon Johnson's Secretary of Defense, and he buys into the domino theory. Like, John F. Kennedy had it right. He said, why fight communism 9,000 miles away when we won't fight it 90 miles offshore, right?
Oh, shit, I love it.
They go over there completely out of view, right, of the American people, and they do whatever whatever weapons testing and what have you, whatever they do. So he finishes that. He gets into the Rand Corporation. And he's basically a bean counter, really. So he came up with that idea, that exact idea, that they looked at it and they're looking at a map. They didn't go.
Right.
Robert Moses, the guy who did the Cross Bronx Expressway.
Right, he
and
did all the highways. Right,
Yeah,
he did all the highways.
The guy never drove a car, Robert Moses. So this
Classic.
It makes sense, though, Joe. It makes sense.
I know. And then this guy never went to Central Brooklyn. He never went to the South Bronx, right?
Right.
They're looking at a map. So they're looking at a map and they're going, hey, why do we have two, 103 trucks? Why is there a second section there? What is that? Why is there a 122, second section? So then they go, you know what? We're looking at the numbers here, just like you said. If everybody responds from quarters, which never happens, right? We wouldn't need those second sections. So presto chango, they're gone, right? And that made the response times and efficiency of fires went completely off the rails, right? And it led to the burnout of so many areas, right? 1/3 of the housing stock in New York burned down during the war years.
Wow.
1/3 of the housing stock.
The whole key of putting out fires is, bro, is getting water on it quick. Now you delayed these guys, you handcuffing them, they're coming from somewhere. Not to mention how many false alarms there were, pull boxes back then. So, they don't take none of this into account.
It also says here in that same, just not to cut you off, but it says here, in addition to cutting second sections, the Rand model led O'Hagan to slash all non-response duties, fire marshals, logistical units, garage, and maintenance, right? So the rigs weren't even, right? How many times there was companies that probably didn't have a rig to respond to. And it says, reading that list, it is no longer a surprise that in a few short years, the Bronx was brought to its knees. I mean, that's really
you said fire marshals too, right? At a height when there was when everything was arson. I know. Let's get rid of the fire marshals. We don't need them, right?
So let me throw this at you guys. 7 different census tracts in the Bronx lost more than 90% of their buildings to fire and abandonment between 1970 and 1980. In 10 years, 97% of the structures in the Bronx. Poof.
When I got to 9244, which was early 1990, I'd been in 43 and 35 before that. They wound up, the entire block behind us was Grand Avenue, right? There was one H-type at 167th. There was another H-type at 169. There was another one at 170. In between those 3 buildings, prairie. There was nothing. It was like
goats. He said goat.
So those buildings were destroyed. They were just brought down. Here's an interesting story from Farrell. Captain Farrell said, I'm sure guys have heard the name Gasoline Gomez, as an arsonist, right? It's kind of like that movie, LA Confidential, right? Remember that character Rollo Tomasi.
Yeah,
The guy who always
he
gets away.
shoots him and he says Rollo Tomasi.
Yeah, and it's the guy who always gets away. Like, in other words, it was a name he made up for the guy who killed his father. Well,
Right.
Gasoline Gomez was just a name that they gave to the ubiquitous arsonist who never got caught. Well, they caught the guy. They caught a guy. They caught an arsonist. And he was saying the reason they caught him was he got himself trapped in a fire he started. So he had to bail out a window.
Nice.
Without a fire escape. But as Captain Farrell calls it, they used to call the garbage in the yards airmail, right? So there was so much airmail in the yard that this guy basically landed in a trampoline. Like, he landed in
he was sitting there.
20 feet of garbage, right? They caught him. He had bumps and bruises and everything like that. And then they caught him, and they had his gas can, right? He marked up the gas can, Captain Farrell. Called in the marshals, brought him and brought the gas can to them. He goes, they're following the case. He gets called to court about a month and a half later, and a buildings department official, New York City buildings department official, meets with the arsonist and his lawyer. He goes, I never heard what they're talking about. They spoke. Then he goes over, the buildings department guy talks to the fire marshal. When they get into court, the fire marshal brings in a brand new gas can, not the one that Captain Farrell gave him. The guy completely walked away, right? And his view was that, look, the fix was in because these landlords had made deals with the city, and that, it was sort of like, everybody knew what was going on, but, as they would say, except for the dumb firemen, they didn't know what was going on. So the guy walked, and it looked like, from their vantage, that he had some assistance, and that the system was kind of rigged,
Right. So this is where conjecture and fact kind of meet,
Yes.
right? We said that
Yes.
the city might have been beyond complacent in letting these buildings burn for a reason of what? They wanted to flatten out the buildings, right? What were you saying before about blacktop and?
Well, it's what Joe Flood wrote in his book.
Oh, yeah, read that, Joe.
Yeah, it's a great quote. He said, the urban planner, Robert Moses, he's the guy who did the Cross Bronx Expressway, the Staten Island Expressway, destroyed whole neighborhoods. Now retired to his Long Island beach house, but still an influential writer for the New York Times and a bevy of magazines, wanted to blacktop the entire South Bronx. With the buildings burned down and the land abandoned, most of the heavy lifting was already done. City Planning Commission studies from the late 60s had recommended the same thing, taking advantage of the burnout to acquire abandoned lots on the cheap and redevelop them. Roger Starr, the head of the city's housing department in the 70s, had actually proposed a policy of, quote, planned shrinkage, closing hospitals, fire and police, subway stations in places like the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn, and pushing out whoever was left living there. A few years later, a friend of Fdny, that's Richard Fdny, the UFA president at the time, from the union, recounted an interesting conversation he had with a high-ranking mayoral aide about the fires and how the city hadn't done anything to stop them, had in fact encouraged the destruction with all the cuts. The quote was, well, you can always look on the bright side, the aide had said. The city got rid of 1.5 million undesirables. And he was right, says Fdny's union colleague. All those people burned out of the Bronx and Brooklyn and Harlem, they moved back to Puerto Rico, to Patterson, New Jersey, and Newark, New Jersey. It was like they had a clean slate to rebuild upon. So that's quotes from from a deputy mayor and, talking to a fire union official. Imagine talking to a fire union official, and telling them that, basically we fucked over you guys. Excuse me. We might have killed a bunch of you guys, but it's for the greater good.
Yeah.
So Joe, you had the owners that were burning and the renters were burning, correct?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
Well, they had a program, right? The city had a program.
My dad used to speak about it all the time when he was out in Brownsville, East New York, Brooklyn, 107 and 44th Battalion, and Captain Farrell, the same thing. I bet you have it, right? 103 truck, 120.
Son of a bitch.
He goes, in all the welfare offices, in both English and Spanish, there was $3,000 relocation money, assuming people were going to lose their possessions and stuff like that. Plus, you got put on the front of the lines for the new and improved public housing, because at the time it was being newly built, right? So
projects, you mean? Projects?
Housing projects, yeah. It was a step up from an old, decrepit tenement building, yeah. So that kind of, the other thing that kind of worked in conjunction with that was the Red Cross had these old rules that only somebody with fire damage could get that relocation set up, right? So if you had smoke damage and water damage, it was sort of like, hey, tough luck, and
they
the
were
people
burning. Yeah.
they would just sort of, that's why people went back to the same buildings
And
multiple
burned
times
that, right.
until they finally, condemned the entire building, so that's
Right, because
why
if you were on the first floor, the second floor, and there was a fire on the fifth floor,
exactly.
you got water damage, you were shit out of luck. So
Yes.
that's why the guys were having fires one after the other in the same building. I'm
Same
assuming.
buildings, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why a lot of times guys like from that era would say there'd be 4 or 5 companies arriving in a similar location, like at a corner, and there'd be 4 buildings on fire. And then among themselves, they'd whack it up and go, okay, 120's got this, 103, you take that one, 107, you got that. And that's how they divvy it up. And that's how I guess that's how they rolled back then. But yeah, they were getting crushed. There's a great thing. You'll find it on YouTube if you want. 120 truck, I think, was the first company to go over 10,000 runs in a year. And he did it like either 1970 or something like that, either 69 or 70. And there's a great exchange. Whoever the officer was in 120 goes, 120 to Brooklyn, 120 truck, ladder 120 is returning from its 10,000th run. And the dispatcher goes, congratulations, and here comes your 10,001.
Don't get too excited just yet. You're going again.
There's more to come. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know what else too comes with hard times like that and crime is the drug use. And now you got these drug addicts living in these abandoned, setting up all sorts of booby traps, linoleum over the holes, or a lot of times also they would either chain the bulkheads shut, because they didn't want any crackheads or not crack at the time, but drug addicts coming in, which made it that much more difficult for the roof man to get the roof. So all of these contributing factors, man, is just the job is hard enough as it is,
right?
Without, and these guys are getting their balls beat in, running from fire to fire.
And they were tired. I mean,
yeah.
So why would they put like for example, like a piece of cardboard in the hallway when you would come in and make a hole and put a piece so that the firefighters would fall in? Why would they do stuff like that? Just to safeguard their drugs?
Yeah, safeguard. Well, they were squatting in there, weren't they?
Yeah, it wasn't directed at the firemen.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It was directed at
cops
or whatever.
Coming in there to rob their stuff, I guess. So it's a booby trap for thing. They used to also have water balloons filled with gasoline in the ceiling. So guys would pull the ceiling, and of course, you get showered with gasoline that would ignite on the way down and everything. A lot of things they went through, and that it's almost unbelievable today, for us. And when I first got on, that's one of the reasons why a lot of the older lieutenants didn't want you to wear a mask in a vacant building, because they were saying you can't see holes in the floor, you can't see this or that. And of course, for me, I used to look at it and go, well, with my mask off, I can't see anything either. So, it's kind of stuff around there that goes into the other.
And I can't breathe.
But I mean, from everything I read too, the nozzle man and the backup never took a mask. It was always the third and fourth guy who brought a mask in.
Yes, in those days, in the 70s. They
tried to make the first couple of rooms, and then the guys would push up on the line with the mask. So the first 2 guys got their asses handed to them, man.
Yes, that's what they were saying. That's what Captain Farrell said. They had a guy, I think his name was Benny Doyle, an 82 engine, and he had been a scuba guy in the Navy, and they used him as a mask man. And they told him, don't even worry about helping with the stretch. Don't chase a kink. Fire's on the 4th floor, like 4C. You go down to 3C, get a look. He'd come in. The first couple guys would be humping the line in. He'd relieve them, and he'd finish the job with the mask on. They called him the mask man. But but that's how they went back then. I think. Plus, think about it. Until the early 70s, they didn't have, the roof stores came in around like 71 or so, right? So
it was all axes then.
Yeah, they were still cutting roofs with axes. 56 truck. They were originally in with 42 engine. Then they were put out of that house after an incident. They were in later on Webster Avenue with 48 engine. But 56 trucks moniker was rapid axes. They were supposed to be really, lumberjack kind of guy. Yeah.
Dan Potter was saying in the chat that we had heard this. I had heard this in Proby school a lot. That the vacants had refrigerators set up to when you open certain things or above the stairwells and stuff like that. All those types of, not just something that you would fall into, but things that would fall on you. You know what I mean?
Yes.
At the top of the stairs, he said something about elevated doors, but.
Yeah, and you know what? But burns were a common thing, bro. They didn't have bunker gear. If they forget to roll up the boots, embers would either always fall on the back of their coat, in their gloves, in their boots. So guys were getting burnt on a regular basis, man.
Yeah. And I know, I'm sure Captain Farrell, as well as my father used to always. My father went out sick 4 times in 37 years, and part of it was when they got on the job, you didn't create overtime. Right, all you did was leave you guys short.
Right, Joe.
So
right.
If you left, right. So if you went out like, oh, my arm's hurting, you basically screwed over the other 3 guys, right? That are left. So they're like, thanks a lot. So if you got, I think he got a metal splinter in his eye.
That's a hot point, Joe.
Hole in his boot. He was in the Luckenbach Pier Factory fire in '57, and they were buried 114 and 201. That's where my dad was. They were buried for a couple, I think 24 hours, a day or part of one day into the next. And I was a little tot, like a tiker. And I remember the guy coming to the door, and I don't even know what he said, but I remember my mom crying because the guy, I think they wanted to give her a heads up that, hey, there's 2 companies that we can't locate at this time. It was kind of a crazy thing, because it kind of jumped the gun, and they were all found. He wound up with, like Kevin was saying about the condition of the coats, they were basically a raincoat. He had that was a munitions factory, the Luckenbach Pier. They had right. And he had a piece of wood went through his coat and embedded into his back. And thankfully it didn't puncture a lung or anything. But that was the 4th time he went out was for a hernia. But they didn't go out because.
That's a good point, Joe. I never really thought about that. That you feel like you were leaving you guys short, and that's the last thing you wanted to do,
so
because
they just never did. Yeah, they never went out. So that's why you talk about these Iron Men. They really were. Like when you think about Captain Farrell, you read some of his stories. That's the crazy thing about the book. I've gone through I've gone through every bit of it, and it reads like fiction. Because from our vantage point today, you go, get the hell out. Right. No one could do that, right? No one could possibly do this kind of stuff, right? Yeah. He had a tour. He was talking on another podcast called the Firefighter Toolbox. He invented a number of tools.
Right. Yeah.
He was saying on that box, he had one tour where they went to 90 runs in a 24-hour tour.
Oh my God!
I'm trying to figure in my mind. I think it was 91 runs in 24. And I'm going, how do you do? But a lot of it was false alarms. But what happens is, you know how that is. You do 20 false alarms, and then you get a job. You're legless at the job. You're already shot. You're tired already, and now you're going to take a beating on top of that. So it was very difficult for those guys.
And just coming in from our brother Will in the chat, coming in shit hot into my Facebook DMs here. Here's the mask that you wore, probably right here. Yeah,
that's a funky looking thing, man.
That's a funky looking mask, man. It looks like some kind of sex toy these days.
Joe, when we first started the company, when we first started the T-shirts, 6 years ago, somebody had sent something to me, or I found it. I don't remember how it was, but it was the fire department of the city of New York, rules and regulations, 1898. Legit. I had the page, right? And we made a shirt of it. and this is what I just happened to pull it up because you were saying like something about the Iron Man, right?
Yeah.
And this is it, section 185. Members of the uniformed force shall devote their entire time to its service, attend all fires or alarms at stations to which they are assigned, detailed, or may be called. Ride an apparatus going to and returning from fires, alarms, unless otherwise directed, exert their greatest energy and best ability to do their full duty under any and all circumstances. Answers to all alarms for fires, unless excused. And then here's this. In no case shall fatigue from duty at a previous fire be accepted as an excuse for failure to answer an alarm.
Wow.
Like, that's great.
That's freaking crazy, man. Like, you know, when you think about, you know, what people might think today, this was in 1898.
Yeah.
And you talk about guys in 1960 and 70 who, you know, same thing in the war, right? If you had a guy, you weren't, you know, tapping out because you didn't, you know, you were a little tired. You know, you stayed with your guys because you were never leaving them shorthanded, and that was really the key, like you just said. That was
I
a
don't know
great
if you have
point.
pictures. I don't know if you have pictures of it, but there's a number of old time fires that they'll show you like 10 or 12 firemen laid out in the street, just like passed out.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like Gettysburg. Yeah. It's like people
I can
lined
try
up,
to find that.
wraps,
But,
you know.
but here's a
And
quote
then
from the book
when they
that Will
revive, they
sent
get
us.
back up and they go into the building again. You know,
Check this out. This quote was I'll find the book that Will sent us. I'll let you guys all know. But it says here, there are firefighters who have become so conditioned to fires that they wouldn't walk an extra block to see one, which is so insane by today's standards. If you think about it, right? Like the guys were just, that's how many fires they were doing. They were exhausted. They didn't give a shit anymore. You know? Wow. Holy smokes.
Yeah, we got to really work on. We were talking about this in the pre-show, right? We got to really work on getting those guys because that time is moving forward where you're not going to have too many guys who worked in those times, man. So we got to get these guys on.
Yeah, it was sad. That one of Captain Farrell's friends and a cohort of his through, I think a 31 truck guy, Charlie McCarthy, passed away last week.
I was supposed to have him on the show, Joe. We were supposed to have him, and it fell through.
He was in. Him and Captain Farrell are in that film, The Bronx is Burning. They have pictures of Charlie McCarthy as a young fireman. I think they have him mic'd up, and then he had an award ceremony, and Captain Farrell was the MC. So it was very, it's interesting to see them as young guys, because Farrell himself was a Navy frogman, which is the precursor to the SEALs in Korea, so he is a tough son of a bitch.
Those guys were the toughest of the tough. Yeah, I mean, they would slather axle grease all over their bodies and do it all like in shorts and a mask and a diving knife, and that was it. So
here's how crazy that got back then. There was a chauffeur in 31 truck who was a union delegate, and actually later became union president. I won't name his name. This is before the strike, but they were starting to have job action before 73, which is when they had the strike, November 73. And one night they had an action, right? And the chauffeur tells them, "Cap, sorry about this, but won't be able to get you back to quarters. We're leaving now." And they all took off. They left him with the rig. It's like 2:00 in the morning. He says the chief's car pulls up and says to him, "Want to get in and stay warm? It's like the middle of the winter." And he goes, "Nope, this is my rig. I'm staying with it." So the chief stays till about 3:30, 3:45, and he leaves. So Farrell took heavy ropes and tied. It was a tiller rig. This is before they got the tower, right? So he gets the thing. He ties off the rear part of the rig to kind of keep it straight. He drives it back to quarters. And he said, I backed it in myself, right? And the next day, that chauffeur, the union guy, says to him, "No hard feelings, Cap. It was just a job action." And he says to him, "In my other job," meaning the Navy, he goes, "I would have taken out a 45 and shot you right in the head for the ship, you know. And you look at that, and you go, that's how they were, And he wasn't saying that as a threat, like, or to bullshit the guy. He was saying, yeah, where I was before, I would have shot you right in the head for abandoning ship like that, And that's by the 60s we lost that. My father one time, I always say this. My dad studied like a madman this whole time. And like when I was a little kid, my mom used to bring my brother and me to visit him. Then she'd bring him coffee or something, right? And he one time said to me, I was in college now, and he said to me in the late 70s, he goes, mid 70s, he goes, my two favorite ranks were fireman and battalion chief. Because fireman, you're in the action. He goes, as battalion chief, you're making some actual tactical decisions, as opposed to a line officer. And but he was studying, studying for the deputies test. So I said to him, so why would you even take the deputies test? So he looks at me like what? Like where's that coming from? And he looks at me and he goes, the FDNY put food on our table and a roof over our heads all these years. I owe them the best that I can possibly be. And you know what I said to him? Like a punk, I go, God, I'd never think like that. And
swing and a miss, he struck him out.
And he looked at me like, what the hell did I do wrong?
I got that look many a time from my dad, Joe. So I know.
You did all right, Joe. You did all right, Joe.
I said to him one time later, but in life, I said to him, the only thing your generation did wrong was you spoiled your kids, because we have most of us of my generation have none of that toughness, the tenacity, and some of it was they didn't want you to take the risks that they did and stuff like that. Like my dad did everything he could to talk Jimmy and me, the only two of his 4 kids who went on the fire department, out of it. And he used to say to me, I'd never encourage anybody to take this job because you never know what's going to happen. And if anything really bad happened, and I had tried to tell you what a great job it was and everything like that, and you got on, and something bad happened, he goes, then I'd feel kind of partly responsible for it. This way you make your own decisions, and I can live with that, And what the reason I took the test, I remember myself, was every guy in his study group was like a big kid. Like when he was studying for like lieutenant and captain, I was still a little kid, not quite a teenager, like 8, 9, 10. And they were like, basically, those guys were about as mature as I was. They were just bigger kids,
Yeah, no doubt.
Which was great. So later, when I'm looking at this going, I couldn't find work that I liked. I really didn't like anything. And I'm going, oh. So I take the fire department test, and I go, when I got on late. I got on at 32. I remember going, why didn't I take this early? I should have took the 77 exam, like with my brother. But it is the earlier you get on, often, unless you bang nails or you do something before this, you guys know, you never appreciate this. There's guys who get on this and complain about
right, because they never did anything except play video games.
Right. And you look at that and you're going, this is incredible. Guys like, Captain Farrell and my dad, they're in war, right? They were happy to come home alive. Right? They never even thought twice about, hey, you're going to another war.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. There was a guy in 316 when I did my 30 days, Joe. I remember, black guy, he said to me, he was in the Vietnam War. And it basically, I think it was a line in one of those movies, like every day is gravy. I guess that was like a running thing that they, maybe they said back, because it was in Platoon, I think, or one of it. And every time that I watched that movie, I think of him because he said to me, and he had at that time, he had 25 years on the job or whatever he had. And he just was like, this is gravy, man. And Coop says it all the time. Those guys were really really set up the next generations to look up to. And even now, like the guys that come, that are in the military now, you could tell the difference in how they act on the job and, how they do things. It's good to do that. That's one regret I have is I didn't go in the military, but
it's kind of tough. Like you said, I think people generalize about generations and stuff like that. Yes, they're
right. Exactly. It's a good point.
Seems to have gone down a little bit, right? There isn't that incredible level of toughness. But I met many people when I was going to those schools with hazmat, especially when you go out to the Midwest, like Pueblo, Colorado, and some of those schools.
Right,
like
the rail class and the bomb class and all that.
You start meeting some of these guys out there, and you see the towns. Pueblo had like 8 or 9 statues to their Congressional Medal of Honor winners, right?
Hmm.
You look at that and you go, wonder how many Congressional Medal of Honor winners there are in New York who came from New York. There ain't no statues for those guys, not in New York City anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, but you look at it and you're going, those guys, they still had. We were in school, Berner, myself, Wayne, Hisgen, and I think a couple guys, Captain Ronfola and another guy from Staten Island, and was with 5 guys from South Dakota. And they were all big farm boys. A bunch of them were vets, and they were completely stand-up guys. They were like 1950s America, you know. And you look at that, so you go, yeah, you can't write off. I can't generalize and say, oh, this generation is for crap or something like that. No generation is. It's just that there's more slackers. You know, like in my generation, there were far more slackers than there were in my dad's day. And then in the generations after, there's, you know, it's been made too easy to be. There's no penalty for being a slacker anymore. You know, that's part of it. You know, and so I think the guys who get on this job and do the right thing, they're exceptional. More so because it's not like they're being. When I got on, you got pressured by everybody else in the house. Like you had to do the right thing. You know, if you didn't, it was a total humiliation. Like when I got on, John Goss was my kind of mentor. You know, he broke me in. And one of the first things one of the senior guys said was, never let that guy pick up a broom. So anytime you even let that guy pick up a broom or you weren't the first guy in the sink, it was a humiliation. You know, today, now guys do that. And it's internal motivation because half of the guys around today, they don't carry on that, you know. So you have to be almost tougher and more internally motivated, and you got to give those guys a lot of credit for that. You know, so I have great admiration for that.
So one thing I wanted to kind of bring up, right? You could say that there was all these negatives from that era, but there had to have been, at least there has to be one gleaming positive. And here, I'll just want to read this factoid and get into it, was that the companies that worked the Bronx and Brooklyn were the busiest in the world. At the time, the FDNY extinguished more fires annually than Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, and Los Angeles combined. Add staggering numbers the fact that over the course of the decade, 50 units were shuttered or moved, many of which came from the busiest neighborhoods. So all that's, you know, crazy stuff. But I mean, it's arguably, it's definitively the truth that these times set the standards for firefighting across the board. Now, I'm sure tools that were made, standards that were set in those days, right? So you can argue that even though that was a negative, what was going on by overworking the hell out of these guys, a lot of the standards we have today are set because of those times.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It was not those line of duty deaths were not for nothing. You know, I mean, they paid in blood for what these kids today, you know, consider the standards.
Look at, you know, they were the heroes back in then. They're the guys doing their job day in and day out, not looking for recognition. How many grabs those guys made back then, Joe? I mean, you know, and a lot of them were recognized for it. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence to find people in those apartments and drag them out. You know, many fires.
Captain Farrell got the Gordon Bennett Award, right, and a number of other ones, right. And you talk to him, and he's the most humble guy you'd meet, you know, and it's like no big deal. It was almost like another guy that is kind of like that is Jimmy Graney. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He was a 33 truck fireman. Last I knew, I think he just retired at 22 and 13. I know which guy. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. He's a major instructor. He's like an instructor in almost everything, you know. But Jimmy was one of the greatest guys, and he was kind of like Captain Farrell in terms of his humility. You know, Jimmy had a bunch of medals. Never took himself serious. He never wore socks. Had this kind of high voice, like a Mike Tyson or Curly Howard voice, you know. So guys used to call him Jerry Lewis.
I'm gonna eat his children.
Yeah. He would they would call him Jerry Lewis. He'd laugh. Never took himself serious. Like John Calamari, who's a great guy from '59, the one that retired out of 120. He was a great guy, but he was very. You know, it's not that he took himself super serious. He had a great sense of humor, but he kind of demanded his respect. which is, he earned it, but Jimmy Grain, he didn't take himself or anybody else seriously, very funny guy, and just really one of the best people you'd ever want to meet,
yeah. I remember him from people just calling him Jerry Lewis when he just said that right now. I remember what you're talking about.
What a great guy. Yeah. And that was a good group of guys. They had Mike Everett from that firehouse, Craig Bucheri. Oh God, I'm trying to think of. You had Ed Zielman.
Eddie Zielman, yeah.
Yeah, you had him on. Jack King. So many guys. They used to do I don't know if I mentioned this the last time I spoke to you guys, but the Christmas tree, the post-Christmas tree, post-Christmas ritual, where they'd light there was an alcove off the kitchen, right? And they had like a little bit of an overhang, right? And they would take the Christmas tree, light it up, and the game was everybody sat around the kitchen table as the smoke flooded into the kitchen. And as it got lower and lower, the last guy to leave won. You didn't win anything. There's no trophy. But you won.
It's a tough guy award.
The tough guy award.
11 lungs award.
Yeah, it was insane. Needless to say, I was detailed over a couple times when he did that, and I never came close to winning that one.
You're the smart guy.
I was like, I think my French fries are coming up. Yeah.
All right. So is it safe to say then, because we talked about this show, that maybe that's, maybe it's not so much conjecture that the city had a part in the.
You could argue is how much of it was deliberate, like that last quote, the quote that Flood quoted Fdny in the mayoral aides saying, and how much was benign, not neglect, but
stupidity,
well-intentioned foolishness. Like the signs for relocation money, where you're basically incentivizing people to, hey, you want to get out of your crummy tenement apartment
and get $3,000 in cash? Yeah,
there you go.
Burn yourself out.
Or that insurance
guys talked about this on the show a million times, that there would be people lined up on the streets with all their belongings.
Yeah. My father used to say that he goes, you'd have some idea that it was an arson fire because people would be out there with their suitcases, televisions would be on the ground and stuff.
Clothes.
It's that, and then you could over-insure buildings. So like, between those two things,
that's crazy. I never knew that, man. That's
absolutely
crazy,
insane, right? To even think that you could do that.
How
is that not a scam? Where if you own a business, let's say you own the building that your business is in, and your business fails, how do you not do that, right? I mean, the reality is the city's begging you almost. They're saying, hey, you can insure it for whatever you want. You pay 2 payments of premiums, and then you pay some goofball to light it on fire. You're in the Bahamas or wherever you go, and it's like, hey, I was nowhere near 168th Street.
Yeah, you're in the clear, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So, and it goes without saying that as they cut the fire marshals, there's no fire investigation budget, so there was almost no penalty for it.
So maybe some of those things were deliberate, Joe. Maybe there was an agenda to flatten out, and look what they were doing. They were burning those people out of tenements to push them into project areas, right?
Yes. Yeah. And you know what the worst thing was too is for us, and I'm sure you guys went to plenty of them, but tenement fires are one thing, and then basement and cellar fires are brutal, right? But you go into a nice project fire, it's like going into an oven. It's absolutely brutal. The cinder block holds the heat, right? So you go in there, you get 2 feet into the thing, and it's oppressive. Like you can feel the rubber on the mask suck into your face. It's a daunting experience.
John Johnson in the chat was saying that people were told in 30 minutes you need to get out because the landlord was burning down the building. God.
Yeah, no doubt.
Whew.
I just saw this thing here just a quick quote on the murders. In 1965, there were 681 murders. In 1975, it was 1,690 murders.
Wow. What was that difference? What was it again, Ruffy, the first one?
681 to 1690.
Wow.
10 years.
Almost 3 times. Yeah, almost 3 times as many, right?
Patty Lee says the hipsters in Bushwick today have never said thank you.
And I was just and I was just telling Patty Lee,
paying for a $14 burger and a $12 beer.
Yeah. But no, I say
idiots.
this every week. I all the time when I get into a rant about New York, these people are living on the backs of people who suffered all those years to get New York to a place where it was finally safe enough so that they could come in and get a $14 beer going for everybody, So it really is brutal. And Patty, you hit the nail on the head, my friend. Cheers. Yeah. It's funny, but it's not that funny.
No.
Funny how? Yep.
You amuse me? I amuse you?
We spoke earlier, right, about the Rockefeller idea of transforming New York. I think that came out in the 60s when people look at it. Even the trade centers, now it's forgotten. We have the Freedom Towers. So it's the second set of buildings. That used to be Radio Row, where they had tons of stores, appliance stores, and places that would fix, because back then you could fix TVs because we all had those tubes. You'd open it back. My dad used to do. You'd open it back. There's a tube that isn't lit. And you'd bring that one into the shop, and they had TV and radio repair shops and everything. They raised them. They just destroyed them and made way for the Trade Center. The Trade Center had no jobs for regular people. For people who were ex-factory workers. You look at it. If you couldn't get into the sanitation, corrections, fire department, police department, you were in trouble in New York City, right? Because there were no breweries anymore. There were no factories anymore.
No manufacturing.
Manufacturing jobs.
You could once make a living like that. You couldn't make a living anymore, and so it was. It's like they were saying. They wanted that planned shrinkage. I think a lot of it. I worked. Before I got in the fire department, I worked with this guy whose father was an executive at Helmsley Spear, the real estate developer. His name was Gene, and he said to me, this is like 1981. So he goes, the Bronx was destroyed already, right? So you're looking around and you're going, man, this is some hellhole. And he'd go, and he showed pictures from like the early 60s and late 50s. And he goes, you believe this is how this once was? That you had to be like a doctor or an attorney to be on the Grand Concourse. Each block in each direction from there was economically stratified. Okay, each one closest to the concourse was a higher income. He goes, now it's totally destroyed. He goes, I'm telling you, this is like 80. He goes, so he's still got a few more years. He goes, 50 years from now, he goes, people are never going to believe it's like the way it is now. He goes, companies like Helmsley Spear, the Trumps, all these, they're buying up all
this shit. Yeah,
exactly. He goes, look at this. He goes, look, get rid of the vision of these buildings and look what you have. He goes, it's valuable waterfront real estate. Yep. He goes, they don't want these people here. They don't want this to be residential. They want this to be at some point to be all office space, beautiful, overlooking the harbor and the East River and stuff like that. That's what they want. And he goes, and believe me, they'll get it. And you look at it sometimes, and you look and you go, yeah, they probably will. Apparently, they will get it. It's just taking a little bit longer, I guess, than they thought. When I was leaving there, they were doing these prefab.
I was going to say, Joe, what's in most of those blocks, like in the South Bronx by 83 and all those companies there?
31, the same thing. They have these prefab homes with particle board beams.
The Niedermeyer stuff?
Yeah, exactly. The aluminum studs, everything.
Yeah, the aluminum studs, the C joists. Yeah.
There was a builder with us in 44, Brian Smith, who was saying you could hold a lot lighter to the particle board beams and light up. They have no fire load at all, like the traditional beams do. But it has great impact load. It can handle weight. Just doesn't handle fire well, right? And I think I was talking to a guy who I worked with for a while, Tommy White, who was saying he was in one, and I know 71 and 55 had the same thing happen. They go in and instead of having 3 hours of burn time, the way you did in those old H types,
oh yeah, it's nothing.
5 minutes, right?
Yeah, it's nothing.
He goes, they're in there, and the floor sags, and he thought they were like it collapsed a little bit.
It's melting. Yeah, yeah.
They later found out that no, the floor, there was no, it wasn't like the floor sagged. The floor gave way. The only thing holding them up was the tacks holding the carpeting up.
Yeah.
You know, so it's incredible. Like you look at that and you're going, that too is a transition period, you know. Because what happens is it's almost like where they have a self-fulfilling prophecy. You bring people in. A lot of times you get the same people recycling through these neighborhoods for a while, and the same things keep happening. You know, like okay, this burns down, this burns, and after a while, you know, I guess they wait it out, you know, and they have some sort of plan down the road, whatever that is. But you know, it's hard to kind of see exactly what that is and how that was formulated. Like Kevin said, how much of this is conjecture and how much, based on those kind of quotations, how much of that is fact? That like certainly the city took a very hands-off approach at the least, and then when he followed the Rand plan, that's what he followed, was very, very just like Captain Farrell. They're very, very complimentary about Chief John T. O'Hagan, right? John T. O'Hagan. My dad never spoke about anybody, but he came in around the time. I think John O'Hagan came on a couple of years before him, so he knew him all the way up. And very innovative guy, very driven, very innovative. But all I had heard was from the firemen, who used to call him the bad John O'Hagan. Right? There was another John O'Hagan who was a deputy in the Bronx. They called him the good John O'Hagan. But the bad John O'Hagan was all you ever heard about. And what it was is the strike ruined the relationship between Captain Farrell and him, who had been very, very close. Captain Farrell happened to be on medical leave when the strike occurred, because it was only 5 hours of strike, but he was on medical leave the day before, and he came back 2 days later. You know, he said what happened was Channel 2, because of Dennis Smith's book, 71, in 1971, a couple of years earlier, Channel 2 and a couple of stations go up to 8231 to see the guys holding the picket signs in front of the firehouse. John T. O'Hagan knew who the captain was, and right away, Captain Farrell was dead to him. You know, like he looked at that, and yeah, that ended their relationship, kind of, and really unfortunate, because it was, you know, it was a lie. The strike. I don't know if people followed this, but it turned out Richard Fdny, the strike was voted down 5,200 to 4,900. He still called the strike anyway. And when his bluff was called, they had to admit that they didn't have the vote for the strike.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was, that's what created so many problems. In his house, he tells a story about how, and this happened throughout the job, guys who went out wouldn't forgive those who didn't. And then there was a guy,
wow.
He mentioned Simmons, Simon Simmons in 120, who was a Marine, a former Marine, and he said, "I took an oath when I took this job. I'm not going out on strike no matter what." You know, guys gave him, you know, grief. He gave it right back. But there was a lot of that. Like, people didn't forgive each other. In 8231, probably like a lot of places, Captain Farrell said, a lot of the guys who went out said, "We're not going to cook with the guys who didn't go."
No shit.
And or went on medical leave, you know, stuff like that, to kind of escape.
Yeah, right.
So he goes. So Farrell came in and he said, I came in with a padlock. He says, and he goes, if you think you're going to exclude one guy or two guys, then nobody eats. He goes, I'll shut this gas main down and I'll lock it. And he goes, try me. He goes, we're going to get through this together. He goes, so I really don't care what you think about each other. He goes, but no one's going to, he goes, I run this fire. And then the guy, remember the guy I told you about with the rig who left him stranded, the union guy? He had to, O'Hagan made him give up 6 of his guys, right? And of course, he made sure he was one of the guys that gave up, to go someplace else. And Fdny gave him a phone call about like, hey, that was wrong. And, UFA is going to lodge a complaint. And his response was, that's a message to you that I run this firehouse, not the union, and, it had to be a very difficult time. And I think a lot of it,
yeah.
Before the 77 exam, the last one was the 71 exam. I was in high school, sophomore year. Yeah, whatever. And so it was, I remember a guy ahead of me took that exam, Marty Selleck. And he was, my God, he had the New York State record for the high hurdles. He was a high jumper as well. Very good athlete. He gets appointed to the Lower East Side, I think 18 truck. And he was working 3 tours in a row. Back then there was no limit. Like they didn't have a 24-hour limit of overtime, So he's working his 3rd tour in 5 engine, which was supposed to be like a gift, like kind of like, oh, this is like an easy tour, for your 3rd stretch, So he, the story was, they get a vacant in their area, and the top floor was set up by the arsonist with gasoline, and the floors below it, unbeknownst to them, were doused with diesel fuel, right, which takes a higher ignition temperature, so it takes more heat to burn.
Yeah.
So they get up there, and now they get cut off. The line gets burnt. They're cut off because of the fire balloon, and now diesel fuel has that very thick, heavy smoke, right? It shrouds the entire building in smoke. And him being the youngest and most athletic, he let everybody jump. The bucket couldn't get but so close to the building. Didn't want to shear, the chauffeur didn't want to shear the bucket off by blasting it into the building. So they put it as close as they could. Guys had to jump for the bucket, right? When he went to get in, something changed. Whether they thought they had everybody, the chauffeur thought they might have had everybody. He started pulling the bucket away.
Oh, shit.
He missed it, went down 6 stories with his mask on, and lasted in a coma about a week, and he died. And to this day, the 24 hours limit on overtime is called the Marty Selleck rule.
Really?
Yeah. And then what's funny about that, in a weird way, is on 9/11, Marty's fiance married another fireman, Lieutenant Harrell, and he was killed that day. Marty's brother,
holy shit,
Tommy Selleck, ran the Marty Selleck run for years.
Yeah.
One of the things the parents there asked him was, just don't take the fire department. So he gets a job with Marsh and McClanahan, the bond trading company up at.
He was in the twin. Oh my God Almighty!
Are you kidding me?
So that day brought that family 2 more tragedies. Like it brought his brother and his fiance's lost her husband.
What year was that, Joe? When he missed the bucket?
I believe 78. I think it was July of 78.
And what company?
Well, he was assigned to 18 truck, Fort Pitt.
Yeah.
And I think he was working in 5 engine. I might be wrong. It might have been 15, but it was one of those Lower East Side engines. It probably was 15. I think somebody would have to correct me on that. 5 engine, I think, is down near the seaport. I think he was up further, still in that Lower East Side area, and I knew him. He was a year ahead of me. So he was like, big man on campus kind of guy. And he was also much more successful. He was a good high jumper. I was nobody.
Right.
He was a record holder in the quarter mile high hurdles. I was a mediocre half miler. So I was down here. He was way up here. So it was, but he was a really great guy for a Catholic school. He was like a very funny kid. He used to come in with these crazy shirts on, like everybody's all, kind of like everything's straight laced in those places, right? He'd come in wearing a T-shirt with a guy with a handful of excrement, right? And the T-shirt caption would read, "Tired of the same old shit," stuff like that. and
How much time did he have, Joe?
He was laid off. He was appointed. I think he was appointed. From what I heard, he was appointed to 60 and 17. Then he was laid off. So he might have been appointed in 73. Then he was laid off in the 75 layoffs. He was hired back on Christmas Day. I think I read somewhere of 77, and then he got killed in July of 78.
So
Yeah.
he didn't have much time actually in the firehouse, and
Not a lot. No.
that sucks.
Yeah, somebody said it was 15 engine, Joe. So
15 engine makes more sense. You know, that I think because 15 is further up, 5 engine is down near the seaport, you know. So yeah, 15 makes a lot more sense. You know, and I had a friend who worked an 18 truck, and they still had still have a memorial for him there and everything, which most places do that, you know. But yeah, it was, like I said, it was such a crazy time for guys. There was, like Kevin was alluding to before, the amount of line of duty deaths was staggering, and that's one of the things that created a rift and a reputation for John T. O'Hagan. He signed off on these cuts, and Joe Flood says it's very strange. He must have been taken up by the Rand Corporation. These guys everybody called geniuses and math whizzes, right? Mm-hmm. He said they first came up with some way of improving response times on false alarms or something like that, or figuring out how to pick out false alarms, predict them and stuff. And right. He was right away sold. So he bought into everything else they did, right? And so the union did have big problems with that. So then they began haranguing him, right? He doesn't really he was like a little bit like Trump, I guess, you know, in terms of being, if you throw him a shot, he throws
coming back at you. Yeah, right.
You know, he doesn't suffer fools gladly, you know? So he made this unfortunate quote, I think it was, because around 76, he said something along the lines of, I could do this job with 5,000 men. At the time, they had about 12, right? And as angry as he was, because I think they were picketing his house at the time, right? Because of signing off on some of these cuts. As angry as you get, you can't say stuff like that, because, guy, they're losing 12 guys. So what are you saying? You're okay with losing 25 or 30? You know, it's just not a good. It's not a good look, you know. So he wound up. That sealed his reputation. He became him and the union were at odds, and going forward, he became seen as basically just an anti-union lowlife, right? And the reality was, he brought radios into the job. He brought tower ladders into the job.
Right.
So you got to look at, you know, as Captain Farrell says, you got to look at him for the good and the bad. You know, yes, he was a guy with a temper, occasionally drank too much, but he was brilliant, very forward-thinking. Captain Farrell said he was the most progressive in the right sense of that word, you know, the forward-thinking chief he had ever seen in the job. And he said, while he was studying on his way up, he said, by the time I'm finished, everything in this job is going to change. And he was right, bringing in all of those advances.
Yeah. Joe, you think when you get to that position, though, those guys almost always lean the city's way, right? I mean, for the most part, or I mean, what do you think? I mean, in your time, I know in my time, I don't really follow it that much, but I would say that I never felt like they were overly leaning towards the fight or fight City Hall. They would never do that, right?
Well, Pete Hay didn't he? Didn't Pete Hay do it?
Yeah, everything's political. And what's funny is my dad, I think I might have told you this story. My dad was, when he was leaving, he was with Marty Farrell, no relation to Captain Farrell, but Marty Farrell was I believe he was the captain of 120 when my dad was in 107. So they knew each other going up the ranks all the time, right? And they were very good friends. So Matty was the Manhattan Borough Commander. My dad was the Assistant Borough Commander. They were called to Ruth Messenger, later ran for mayor. She was the Manhattan Borough President at the time. And they were called down to defend the physical standards on the entrance exams for firefighters. And they're both explaining away that, how physical the job is, the demands of it and stuff like that, which we've spoken about. And she's kind of half listening. And about 5 minutes into the spiel, she puts her hand up, and says, stop. You know what? Thank you for your input. But when all is said and done, isn't a firefighter basically a glorified construction worker?
Ooh,
I remember father said to me, I remember him coming home and he said, that's what they think of you. That's a rich woman living in a doorman building. That's what they all think of you. Don't believe your press clippings about it, like how these people think you're great. They don't think you're great. Look at how they treat you at contract time. You know, they're demanding too much. You're looking for 2%. And these guys are greedy, right? He goes, they have no use for you. You're less than a doorman. A doorman does something for them. You know, firemen, cops, you know, yeah, they're useless to them. You know, they have no use for you. And I always remembered that, you know, that's, I think they were right on the money with that, you know. And yeah, so when they did stand up, when you did get guys who did stand up, like Chief Kilker in the 6th and Tom Moran in the 7th Division, were two guys like that. And there were others. Chief Joe DiBernardo was like that in the 6th. When you get chiefs like that, their input is blunted because back in the 80s, you had Joe Bruno and what's the other guy's name? Spinato were the commissioners, right? They were both young lawyers, and they had an antipathy for the chief officers in the fire department. They would look and you could see where the guy'd go, he's an attorney, and maybe he's making 180, and he's looking at some chief, and he's going, look at this old geezer. He's almost making as much as me. He never went to law school.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So they had really an antipathy for a lot of the people in the press. They don't ask their opinions about anything. They already came to their opinions. So they really want the chiefs to echo what they want you to say, like echo their view. Or, okay, yeah, thanks very much. And then they're going to do what they want anyway. That's, I think, the way that usually
it's kind of how it's, anyway, that's the way I've seen it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of all that, you guys, like, that kind of brings us around a little bit to this day and age, and you know, the current culture, you know, towards anyone in uniform. But also, I wanted to ask you guys, like, if you look at the facts of the case, if you look at history and you look at the 60s leading into the 70s, right, the overspending that then led to the interest rates rising and then the hyperinflation. And we're really on the precipice of that. I wanted to ask all you guys, especially you, Joe, what do you think the future for firefighting is in New York? Do you think there's a potential for another Warriors, or do you think something like that would be kind of sucked in a little quicker because we could see that happening again? Or do we go bankrupt again because of the, I mean, New York's underwater to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. I think 20 or $30 billion, you know, something like that. So,
well, you know, what's funny is you would think that New York wouldn't go bankrupt again, but now without the Financial Control Board overseeing the spending, you're looking at it where we've lost revenue. This guy keeps spending, the current mayor keeps spending more money, right? Despite restrictive, constricting revenues. So that's a problem. And as far as the firefighting, I've always said this, and I may be completely wrong, but I think at some point you see the diminution of standards. You know, they've reduced the written exams to a joke. Even when I took the 82 exam, one of the questions I'll never forget was 4 views of a gauge, like a car's gas gauge, quarter, half, 3/4 full, right? And the question was, which one reads half full? And I remember looking around at that, and I looked around at the people, and I go, there's got to be some way of finding out who got that wrong. Because if anybody got that wrong, they should just take your key and not let you drive for your own safety. Because
right.
So I remember thinking, like, what place does that have on an exam? Like, what is that? To show you're not handicapped or something like that? I don't know why you'd have a question like that. But the exams have been watered down physically and cognitively. And part of it is, look at the Notre Dame fire. You know, they had that robot Colossus. I've been to Notre Dame the year before that, to Paris, and the walkways onto, it's a little island that where Notre Dame is, a little island in the
right in the river, right?
Yeah, you could throw a rock from each side,
right, side to side, right? Yeah.
And so it's in the middle of the Seine, and it's a very narrow part of the Seine. But to get onto that, there's no roadway for trucks, so it's like a little walkway. You can barely get two people abreast, right? So they brought this Colossus, this 1,100-pound robot in to put the interior fire out for that fire. In the Navy, they have this thing called SAFIR, SAFFIR, and it's a shipboard firefighting robot. And I looked at that, and part of me looks at it and goes, just being practical. If you were mayor or I was mayor, and somebody pitched this to you and said, hey, you could basically save all those salaries, all that sick time, all that overtime, all those pensions, right? None of that anymore. We pay the guys who are on now, like they get pensioned out, and whatever we inflation will take care of that. And we can go forward with these mechanical, kind of fire department. I don't know if I think New York would be the last place to do it, but I think that some places are going to be faced with such budget constraints that they may have to almost do that. I don't know. I don't know how extensive that would be. Like, in other words, could you rely on that entirely, or would you still need a staff, or would the staff just have to be people to transport it? And
or is this even a conversation? Because are we going to get so low in the coffers that we get to the point where people are torching their buildings, or that's the thing. Like, it's a hard thing to predict, obviously, but do you think that it was the perfect storm of all the things happening in the 70s to bring us here? And do we think that is in the works again?
Here's the thing that you could look, and I know Lou and Kevin know that have seen this, is you can see it when Lindsey Beam brought the city to default and bankruptcy. Ed Koch brought it back. He was
he was a Democrat too, right? He brought it back.
He went to war with the Democrats as much as Republicans, and he was, like you said, he was
fiscally responsible guy, right?
Yes. Then you had Dinkins. And when he won in '89, Koch famously said, the people have chosen, and now they must be punished.
I like that one. I never heard that one. I'm writing that shit down.
What happened with that was, of course, unfortunately for David Dinkins, who seemed to be a very nice man and a very stately person. He was an old-time politician. He was very reasonable and everything like that. He was nothing like the current occupant, but he just kind of came along at a time when the crime was exploding. I think the murders topped 2,000 2 years running during his administration. Then you had Rudy, who again was like Koch. He was like a pragmatist, fiscally responsible, big law and order. The thing with Mike Bloomberg was he maintained the law and order part of the Giuliani administration, even though he wanted to restrict. You can't smoke even outside. You can't eat
soda, no Pepsi,
stuff like that.
Guys worried about that shit.
As much as of a control freak as he was still tough on crime.
Right.
And now you have this guy. So unless they go back, like you said, you wonder. People say it can't get any worse, but it depends on the incompetence level.
Right.
If you continue down this path, yes, it probably could get a lot worse.
Well, if you look at the crop of current candidates,
it's not helpful, right? Doesn't inspire confidence.
So
you guys spoke about the 70s with the inflation. That's something that people should be more aware of. This is how it happens, how it hurts us. It hurts workers because, and retirees, it crushes retirees.
Oh yeah.
But, for workers, I remember the Daily News had an article, and this was back in '97, the year my dad passed away. In 1972, a first grade cop or fireman, including with average overtime and everything, made about $12,000 a year, right? By 1997, 25 years later, they were making $72,000 a year, roughly, approximately, first grade firemen and cops, firefighters and cops. And they said, there you go, you're making 6 times as much currency. But in 1997, that first grade cop and fireman had 1/3 less purchasing power than the guy in 72. And that explained why firemen like my dad and police officers and everything, they could have a wife that stayed home, right? They had the nuclear family where the wife could afford to stay home with the kids if that would work out for them. You just simply can't afford that today unless somebody is doing incredibly well. So the one way of looking at that would be to say that $1972 was worth $96,1997, right? So the cut that the firemen and cops took by 1997 was they should have been making $96,000 to keep up with that level of inflation. They only made 72. Now we all know, and I'm sure you guys ran into where a guy retired in 1980 after 20 years, got on in the 60s. So maybe in 1980, maybe he was making 3/4 if he got out on disability of 26,000 or 28,000 with overtime, right? And by the late 1990s, guys are going, man, how's Walter living on $16,000? Right? I mean, that's roughly what you'd be getting, right? So you're looking at something like, what the answer is? I don't know. I guess he might be one of people eating cat food, but that's what happens. So it's distressing. It's a tax. In a way, it's a tax because you cheapen the money by expanding the supply, so you make the money worth less than it was. So it's a tax. It's a cruel tax because it taxes workers and the poor most. The rich guy. If you're forget billionaire. If you're a person with a
401k,
tremendous amount of money, you don't give a damn, right? If you have 10 million or 12 million bucks in the bank, what the hell do you care whether gas goes to $6 a gallon?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Right?
Joe, I heard a stat the other day, and I was talking to my nephew this weekend about this. If you took all the dollar bills, not to get too crazy because we were talking about the fires and stuff, but if you took all the dollar bills ever made in the United States from history, and piled them all up, 40% of them were printed
since 2020.
In 2020, 40% of them were printed in 2020.
So we'll leave that as an open-ended answer. Could it happen? Yeah. Wait till inflation kicks in. Like Chief Kleehouse had something back there, Pete, talking about
I saw it.
The arson, that there's not the incentives.
Arson will probably never be
rampant again. I'm sorry, Lou.
Yeah,
We got it at the same time. Most incentives, bad as they were, are not in place anymore.
Yes,
Fire investigations and modern day forensics are much more advanced. So maybe it's more of a policing issue, right? Since they're defunding the police and crime. I mean, a toddler was shot in Times Square after a guy was trying to murder his brother the other day. You know what I'm saying? So in the middle of Times Square, this Times Square now, Disneyland Times Square, not, so maybe it'll be more of a problem for police. Maybe the warriors are coming for them more than firefighters. But to tack on what you said about the Ed Koch thing, I always remember this quote by H.L. Mencken: "Democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard." So there you go. You get what you vote for, and you vote with your dollars too. So that's what I tell everyone all the time.
But I think Chief Kleehouse is correct about that. Not only are the forensics better, the investigation better, even the building, the sprinklers. You have sprinklers that suppress a lot of fires now. You have a lot more. Well, and you even have a lot more fireproof buildings. You really don't have many, non-fireproofs being put up anymore. Most of the buildings have some sort of fire suppression systems in them and stuff. There may be some single-family home, but I mean, like big buildings now, they're not built the way the old H types were. And as Captain Farrell was saying, is those things, ironically enough, despite the fact that they were non-fireproof, they could hold, like he said, they could hold fire for 3-4 hours before.
Technology too with cell phones. We get the calls a lot quicker. Yeah. Everybody has the phone. You see a fire, you're calling it right away. So the guys get into the
Citizen app or some shit like that.
Yeah, Citizen app. I was just about to say. Yeah.
Yep.
Nice, boys.
Nice job, fellas. Joey.
Joseph, you're the man, Joe. You're always the man, Joe.
Oh no.
We're gonna work on Bobby Farrell, getting him up to date. And
You'd
we'll actually
love to
maybe
talk
have the
to him.
both of you on again, so that way.
I tell you, he'd be an awesome guest. You
Yeah.
know,
Clearly.
just a great guy and a wealth of information, with a million stories. You know, some of the stories are hilarious, and then some of them, you know, are almost like, you know, they could bring you to tears. You know, just how you know, how pathetic some of the situations that they found themselves in were. You know, like being stranded the way he was by his own guys. You know, when you walk out. So
Hey,
you
when
wouldn't
is
see
that
that
book? When is that book coming out, Joe? Do we have a title, or do we know?
His daughter, Carrie, is very, very fastidious. She's been meticulous with the editing. And my issue, I've made it, how can I say? I complicated her job, unfortunately, because I write the way I wrote with the fire department's journal. You know, units, rigs, quarters. I always capitalize those, right, as proper nouns. So you know, returning to quarters, everything is capitalized. Rig, you know, getting on the rig was capitalized. She was saying, no, that's, you know, she's a much better, she can speak much better English than I can. So she's looking at it going, no, none of that gets capitalized or any of that.
So do you have is there a working title for it yet?
Yes, it's simply going to be called The War Years.
Oh, I like it. The Warriors.
Yeah.
All right. And so we'll let the audience know, or maybe by that time it'll be published when we have on Captain Farrell. And you'll
bring your pipe on again, Coobs.
Oh, I'll bring my pipe on. We'll do off his corner. So, Joe, you want to plug your books again? We got A View from the Back Step. Two editions are out, right?
Yes, right now I have two. The first one, The Harlem Shuffle, was, I guess, about my first year. And really, I think I try to say is that they're not about me, because I'm no one of consequence. I'm no Captain Farrell or Lou or Kevin or anything like that. Just being honest. So it's really it's a thank you. The both of them, and the third one as well, are thank you letters, basically, or peons to the people I was fortunate to know and work with on the job. So in that regard, I try to be honest about some of the way we bent the rules a little bit, but I also wanted to be honest about the fact that those errors have been besmirched today by people who opposed basic standards in the job, referring to the people in the 70s and 80s and stuff as a bunch of drunks and stuff like that. And I wanted to kind of try and show people, allegedly, yes, what those guys really were like. You know, were there like occasional problem children? Yeah, there still are today, right?
Yeah.
So
that's in any walk of life or profession, though, Joe.
Exactly, right. So the reality was, I think those errors deserve defending, and that's why I was so happy to put my third book aside to work with Captain Farrell, because I think the 70s era was even more vital to remember. And as you know, as you guys mentioned, is there aren't that many in that era left. You know, so whenever I speak to him or exchange any kind of emails even with him, what makes me it makes me think of my dad. It's a connection to my father in that way, because he has some of the same views. You know, when Rudy took over as mayor and he put Bill Bratton in as police commissioner, the first thing he went after was the squeegee men, right? If you remember that, right? That was
there was squeegee guys all over the place.
So I remember I had 10 wins on or something like that. And he gave Bratton was giving his inaugural address. So, like, you know, what his plans were for stuff. And there was a woman reporter, and she says to him, the question she asked is, you're going to lock away all the squeegee men? What are they going to do? How are they going to make a living? Right. And without missing a beat, he goes, with that Boston accent of his that he had at the time, he said, I say, get off the booze, get off the drugs, and get a jab. right? And I remember saying, "Holy crap, that's exactly what my dad would say."
Yeah.
And that's exactly what my father, if you would put him in this spot, that's what he would have said. I say, get off the bus.
Broken windows policies fundamentally changed this city for the better. And that's old Rudy. But don't forget, before he even got in, he prosecuted corrupt elements of the police department, which really paved the road for cleaning up the city. So you're not going to get a guy like him, and he's still to this day fighting against, shenanigans. So, you're not going to get a guy like him often, though.
No.
All right, fellas.
Nice work,
thank
guys.
you
Great
so
job
much.
tonight, fellas. Joey, appreciate it. Wealth of
No,
knowledge.
thank you guys.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'm gonna leave
You're
you
the man,
guys
Joe.
I'm gonna leave you guys with a quote that I circle from Dennis Smith's book. It says, "I've lived in the city too long to hate it, but I know it too well to love it." So.
Wow, that is a good.
Jack.
Yep.
Because what you think about, when I think of the city now, I live upstate, obviously, but when I think of the city, sometimes I, think about the good stuff, but in my mind, I don't think that, my block doesn't exist the way it was when I was a kid, right? It doesn't, the people aren't there. It's not the same feel. And that's the same thing with my grandmother's block in Brooklyn and Williamsburg. It's not the same people. They knocked down half the buildings and built, 10-story buildings now. It's not the same stuff.
Yep.
But
you got any shout outs there, Roof?
I do. I got one. I was supposed to do this last week. I apologize to the boys in Poughkeepsie. May 5th marks the 6th anniversary of line of duty death, City of Poughkeepsie firefighter Timbo Gunther. This is from Tim Ryan. He wondered if I could give a shout out, brothers. I apologize. He says the local 596 boys are big fans of the show, and thanks for everything that you guys do, and keep up the good work.
Oh,
I got one too. They reached out to me. So if anybody's coming to see us at any of the shows, Pittsburgh or the Nassau County one, also take a peek and at the Terry Farrell Foundation. Stop at their booth, and it's a good cause. Stop in and see those fellas. And also for Susie tonight, I think I've been reading, was she in a car accident or something, Pete?
Yeah, she was in a car accident. So Susie said,
She always has something going on, huh?
Yeah, heart attacks and
operations.
A lot of operations.
But Susie, we're all thinking about.
Christ.
All right, prayers to Susie.
Prayers to Susie. We hope you're good.
All right, Petey.
Hold on. I got Thursday. We have Lieutenant Bobby LaRocco.
Oh,
Rocco. So Rocky, as he's known, just so guys know, I know he worked at 176 with Bobby Gallione. He was in Rescue 2 from 88 to 97. He was lieutenant in Ladder 9 for a couple of years, and then he was finished out his career, almost 40 years, bro, in Squad 41. So, and he's a very funny dude. So Bobby LaRocco. Yeah, the Rocky. He's going to be on Thursday.
All right, Rocco! I never get tired of that.
All right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, guys and gals, find us on iTunes Podcast, Spotify, or wherever fine audio podcasts are found. Subscribe to us there. It's free. Listen to us on your commute. Listen to us in the gym or wherever you so choose. Guys, also, if you're here on youtube.com/Getting Salty Experience, do us a favor, hit the like, subscribe, and share button. Also, tap that little notification bell so you get to see when the new shows and videos are up and out. Also, guys, head on over to Instagram.com or Instagram app on your phone, where you will go find us at Salty Dog Inc., where you can also subscribe for free if you like to see cool, salty fire photos that Mr. Louis Refrano posts at 1:11 a.m. every morning before he has his early morning jog, and then he goes to kill a small animal of sorts. Guys, also don't forget to support us over at gettingsaltyapparel.com if you guys like firefighter apparel, gear, tumblers, cups, all those wonderful things. If you guys have a firefighter in your life that you'd like to give a nice gift to, gettingsaltyapparel.com. I'm sure we'll have something for you. Thank you to all you guys who supported us tonight in the super chat. It really, really does help, especially a guy like me. This is kind of like my main gig now, so I appreciate that. Also, guys, if you got a question for the Q&A, we are still doing Q&As, of course. Shoot it over to us at gettingsaltyexperience@gmail.com. And not last but not least, guys, koobspodcast@gmail.com is the place to send your cool helmet cam videos, fire videos, also pictures of your rig, pictures of your tables, all that sort of stuff for our new segment that's every morning at 9 a.m. Every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. It's the Cup of Joe and some Fuego segment that we work on. And guys, last but not least, Getting Salty Fans page. The Getting Salty Fans page on Facebook. We got thousands and thousands of subscribers there. It's not our page, but it's about us. And guys, there is some great, cool, funny memes, funny stuff going on there. Fire news, fire talk, all that sort of stuff's going on there. So Getting Salty Fans page, guys.
Did you see that the one that the guys did with Hitler?
The dogs?
I mean,
oh yeah, with Hitler. Oh my God,
dude, I laughed for about 20 minutes.
yeah, that was.
If you know all the inside jokes on that one, there's a lot of inside stuff on that one, but it is pretty
Even
funny.
if you don't, it's funny as hell.
Yeah.
I know half of them, and it's funny as hell.
They got too much time on their hands.
Remember some years ago there was like a funny kind of Hitler video, and then the guys just kind of cleared out all of the subtitles and replaced them with Refrano subtitles, which were
I've seen a couple of other people. You know, they do that one snippet. They do that with a lot of guys. Like there was it was around for a while. It was going around.
Absolutely hilarious, guys. Go on over to the page, check it all out. You also see posts about what we're up to and what we're doing there. We really appreciate
people asking about the shows. Pete posted all the dates and all the locations of the shows. Go back and check it out. It's on the fan page.
Yeah.
Also, send that stuff. Helmet cam videos, father-son pictures, the table, the rigs, jobs. Send them all if you want to see them. We'll make you famous.
And guys, if you need to find that, also go to the Getting Salty Fans page and search my name, and you'll find my second to last post with all that sort of stuff going on. Maybe third post back or something like that. So that's all the news that fits the print.
Right, Joey. Thank you so much again, Joey. We're going to have you on.
Oh, we love you. Thank you.
Joey will be our historian.
Joe.
We'll check in with our historian, Joey. All right, fellas.
I'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah, stay on as we hang up here.
Hang on, Joe. Hang on. Don't hang up yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll talk to you. All right, guys. Stay low and go.
All right. We'll see you at the big one.
Cheers, brothers.